Welcome to the Allure of Crime Podcast. Your host, Joe Loya, robbed close to 30 banks in the late 1980s. Now he writes and comments on crime in our culture. This weekly podcast will feature Joe interviewing directors of crime films, actors in crime TV shows and movies, and writers of crime scripts and books. And of course, Joe, sharing his own experience and perspective on the allure of crime.
It's just four blokes. Yeah. Four blokes chillaxing. Okay. Okay. The story of how I became a writer is an interesting one. In 1988, I got out of prison. I'd done 2 years of state prison. I got out and I went on a 14-month bank robbery spree. And I was arrested in 1989. So I go to prison, still a criminal. Now, just because you go to prison, some people think, oh, you lay down and you just become, just hang out in there, and then you come out and you either become a criminal again or your life's changed. But you go to prison, you're still a criminal, and I was a criminal. I was making knives, selling drugs, made a little money, doing a bunch of little things, little hustles, but a lot of crime in prison, smuggling liquor in, that kind of thing. So I do the crime thing, and I start running with a group of guys. And about halfway through, a couple years in, my ex-cellmate is murdered. And me and a couple other Mexican guys, we get pulled up under this homicide investigation, and we go into solitary confinement. None of us has anything to do with it. And it would be 2 years before they figured out who actually committed the murder. In the meantime, we're inside, we're in the hole. And even in there, I'm doing crimes. We're making liquor in prison wine in our cells, and smuggling knives between all the different cells. But then solitary confinement starts really kicking my ass. And one night, in my bed, and I'd started hearing noises in my head a little bit, like just like a din of noises, and I hear Joe Loya, or Joe. And I go to the prison door, I go to my cell door. Nobody's in my cell, obviously. I go to the cell door and I look out to see like who yelled for me and whatever, right? And nobody yelled, none of my friends. And I go back and I lie down, and a couple of days later I wake up, I roll over, and there's a bald boy in my cell. I mean, like it feels like I could touch him. And I'm lying there in my bed enough to know that this is not a bald boy in my cell, a little 7-year-old kid. And I know it because I'm in prison. You can't have a kid there, but it feels really real. So I roll over and I feel like, oh my God, I'm losing my mind. I'm hallucinating that there's a bald boy in here, and it depressed the hell out of me. But a couple days later, really depressed, thinking I'm going mad, I realized that I remember that there was a 7-year-old boy when I was 7 years old who rode his bike into my neighborhood, and it ends up he had leukemia, and he died 3 months after we became friends. And that's who this bald boy represents in my psyche. And I write the story of that. It's the first story that would end up in my book. So I write that story of my memory of this kid, and in the story, there's my mother. She's alive still. My mother died when I was 9, and here I am 7. And not only is she alive in the story, she's healthy before she got kidney disease. So I'm lying in bed, and I'm thinking about my mother. I'm writing around the story, and all these emotions come up in me. And I have to deal with them now, because now I'm a really bad guy. I'm a kid, commit a lot of crimes. I run with guys. We're doing crimes even in solitary. But I remember this moment when I was a sweet kid, when I was still innocent. And it really messed with me. But I needed to keep writing these stories. And I went back into my childhood and I started writing these stories and collecting these stories. And I started working on these stories. That moment with the bald boy humbled me so much, scared me, and made me realize I don't have any control of my mind, that I lost the sense that I had control, and it began the process of me changing. But more importantly, 2 years before I get out of the we all get released from solitary confinement because we didn't have anything to do with the homicide, but I had changed fundamentally, and now I knew I wanted to become a writer when I got out. So 2 years before I get out, I write a letter to the essayist Richard Rodriguez, and I start telling him stories and ask him if he'll be my pen pal, and he says sure. And so we start sending our stories back and forth to each other. And there's this great line in there he said, I love writing to you because you can tell secrets to strangers that you can't tell to people you love. And that became kind of the motif of our letters. We became each other's secret sharer. He didn't know me. I didn't have to prove anything to him. It's just all there on the page. And that improved my writing, because there's this great writer, Richard Rodriguez. There's a book that was called The Art of the Personal Essay, and it begins with Seneca and he ends with Richard Rodriguez. So he is a famous essayist, and I'm reading his letters and I'm learning how he writes, and I'm picking up all these habits of how to construct a sentence, how to construct an argument, how to construct a paragraph. Really, it's like I'm going to grad school with these letters, these hundreds and hundreds of pages of letters that we have between us for 2 years. Anyway, I get out of prison and he says, "You're a writer. When you get out, I'm going to hook you up." I get an editor at the Pacific News Service, and I started writing an op-eds right away. 3 months out, my first one was published for the San Francisco Examiner, then the LA Weekly, and finally I started writing, I wrote an op-ed for the LA Times. And there had been this big bank robbery, and I wrote about it in LA, in North Hollywood. All that to say that writing those letters with Richard was an important part of becoming a writer. I never took a writing class in my life, and since then I wrote a memoir, The Man Who Outgrew His Prison Cell, and conduct writing workshops in and out of prison, in reentry facilities, in the prisons, women's prisons. In fact, I had coffee recently with a woman who I conducted a writing workshop with in one of the women's prisons here in California. She's now out and she's got her life together. It's kind of cool. But what was really interesting, kind of like coming back around, is I had a friend named Larry Smith, and his wife is Piper Kerman from Orange is the New Black. And a lot of our friends sent out this email once and said, "Larry Smith's girlfriend is in prison and she needs books." And that's the first time I'd heard of Piper. And so I sent her my book, and I sent her a letter and said, "Nobody will understand what you're going through better than me." And I explained my correspondence with Richard. And I told her, "You want to talk about what you're going through, the politics of the place, whatever, I'm here. You want to talk about writing, and you need to write. You need to think about writing this book." And there was reticence, there was pushback, and but that was the beginning of us talking about the writing. Now, she gets out, and I continue to nag with all her friends, telling her, "Hey, you need to write this book." And Piper's cool, because she just processes things, she figures it out, and sure enough, she gets the work of writing that book and writes this really kick-ass book, Orange is the New Black. So I get the book, and I open the book, and I'm reading the book, and it's a great story. And then I come to a page where there's a letter that she had published from our correspondence right there in the book. And it hit me like power. It was like, you got profound relationships with people. Once you've changed your life, there's all these weird connections for people in the past, connections you make with new friends. But this one was powerful because I realized I had begun my writing career with a correspondence with a man outside of prison. And here I am looking at Piper publishing my letter, and it had been integral part of her becoming a writer. But more importantly, the thing that I remembered was when I was writing to Richard, and when I came out and we hugged it out on my porch in my apartment where I was staying with my brother, I looked at him and I swore like this ancient, oath. "I owe you. I will pay you back for everything you did for me. Thank you, brother." And he looks at me and he says, "No, you don't owe me anything. Your job is to go find the next Joe Loya." And when I looked at that letter in my letter in Piper's book, I felt like I found my Joe Loya. So what you're going to hear now is I was just in Ohio hanging out with Piper. We went into one of the local prisons there and we conducted a writing workshop. And it was great, man. These guys are so cool. It was her third workshop, and these guys were joking with her, and she had a great rapport. It was fantastic. And when we were done, we got together and we did this interview. So enjoy, everybody. A quick thing about this Piper interview. I had to go to Columbus, Ohio. I had to get this in with Piper at her house. Because of funding issues, I couldn't take my audio guys with me. So this is what I got, and it's not the best sound. I brought it back. My audio guys have worked on it. It's really amazing. Do me a favor though, consider donating to the cause so we can make sure that from now on, everything is fucking cool.
Okay. It's okay. So, thank you for being part of this podcast, Piper Kerman.
Hey, Joe.
Hey. Okay, first let's just start by what happened today. I just got to talk about it. Because I've come back and I took a nap and I woke up and I feel like my face might be glowing. I'm so happy. I went in with Piper to some prison where she's conducting a writing program, and we were there with some guys and talking about the protagonist, teaching them the protagonist how to write about be the protagonist, write about protagonists, a creative writing program, nonfiction. At a point there, when they had their writing assignment and they had their heads down, they're writing feverishly, I looked over at you and I realized, like, I did time separately, for you doing time separately, and now, like, we're here and we are enjoying, like, not being here, but we're, the irony of, like, the parrot, like, we're not here, but we're here together. Like, we walk down the corridors, we're hearing the stuff, I'm getting, my body's responding to it again. And that I have the privilege to be in that class with you, talking to these men about the story, how they can own their story, how they can write it in compelling ways for people to listen to. This is journeying our experience of writing into something that can help other people understand how they could also, write better and own their story and all that kind of stuff. So, thank you for letting me come in. That was beautiful.
Well, thank you so much for coming. To me, your being there today with me in this medium security men's prison where I'm teaching a writing class was in some ways just the totally logical continuation of the story, because, our correspondence began while I was incarcerated. You were free. You were about to publish your memoir. Your memoir was published the year that I was in prison. Mm-hmm. I remember you being so shocked that I managed to get a copy of your book because it was in hardcover, and you were like, there's no effing way that VOP lets you have a hardcover book. But in fact, at that time, I'm not sure if that's still true, you could get it directly from Amazon. Mm-hmm. And someone sent it to me, probably Larry. So something that you were just so urgent about, even only on paper. Like, I met you on paper.
Right.
I met you on paper through your letters, and then I met you on paper when I read your book, your story. Even when we only knew each other in that way, through that correspondence, you pressed me. You were like, you must write about what's happening to you and about what you're experiencing and the changes that are happening to you. And I remember sort of saying via paper, I'm just not a writer. I don't think of myself that way. I don't do that. I don't keep journals. None of that.
Because, you knew all these, the literary crowd in the Bay Area before you went to New York. And you felt like, I know all these great writers. I'm not them.
Oh, absolutely. That's definitely how I felt. I've known many writers because of Larry and his career in journalism and all these amazing writers, including amazing memoirists. Mm-hmm. I've known them for many, many years. Definitely didn't think of myself like that in any respect.
Right.
And so I remember being really resistant even through that jailhouse correspondence. Like, you pressed me to do it. You talked about your own life. You talked about how writing transformed you as a human being while you were incarcerated and after you were incarcerated. And I just wasn't like, that's not me. That's great for you, Joe, but that's not me. And so, but you were really persistent. There's any word that anyone would use for you. Persistent would probably be it. And I remember that when we finally got a chance to meet face to face, once I was free, you were still being persistent about this.
Yeah. But I'm the guy who dragged people into the vault to give me money. So I'm used to a certain resistance and pushback. So I can handle when somebody's looking at me like, I don't want to talk about it. I'm like, hey, so are you writing that book yet?
I really feel like I would not have written the book if I had not met you. I just feel like your example was really powerful, but also the nudging was powerful. And Larry really nudged me really hard too. I think you and Larry were probably the two biggest nudges.
Yeah,
do it. And I'm grateful for that, obviously in about 100 million ways. And so today, to have you with me in this class, which I've just begun to teach, in a medium security men's facility and in a women's facility here in Ohio was really powerful. And your book was the first book that I assigned. You know, the guys had read my book, but it was really important to me to assign your book for them to read because, well, my book was an interesting way for us, basically for me to get this, to know the students better, and more importantly, for them to get to know me better. Your story, in some ways, may be closer to their own stories because of gender, because of the nature of your crime, because of a lot of things. That's not a given, but it's a good chance. And for those guys who are so excited and who have already shown, you know, so much promise as writers, they have amazing stories. But for them to see the personification of somebody else who, you know, not only did time, not only did a lot of time, but did like 2 years of shoot time, to see the impact that writing your own story has had on your life, the way the very act of writing has shaped your life, I think was really, really important. Because it was important for me to see it, and I can only imagine that it's also important for them to see it.
Yeah, I mean, that, we have both written and they both know we publish, so that's a good thing for them to see that there's a narrative that they think people should be, they're ashamed of the narrative in some ways, and even though we like to share those stories, because I used to share these stories all the time. I've been a storyteller even when I was in there with other guys. I love to tell stories. But in terms of like taking them to the outside world, we feel like they're kind of tarnished and there's a lot of shame attached to these stories. And we don't know how to deliver these stories to the world without a sort of some contrition attached to it. Like when we talk to our family about the things we did, we can't be like the guys on the tier. When I tell a story about, hey homeboy, you know, you should have seen I did this and this and that. When we get on the phone, yeah, you know, I did that and I feel bad about it. Like we have to put an entirely different spin on it and get all sentimental and like try to earn all sorts of compassion and, you know, forgiveness or whatever. But when we tell it to each other, there's a green light. Tell what you want, say what you want. And you get kudos if you can really like get me engaged with your story. And a part of going in there when I talk to these guys is to never moralize about, you're going to tell me a good story. I don't want to hear a good story. And by good, I mean, you know, in quotation marks. I want to hear a strong story. I want to hear a compelling story. I want to hear a story that surprises me. There was a good question we had today. We had several good questions. About surprise. The title. This guy asked me about my title, and we talked about lyrical, and I wanted to be surprised by my title. But yeah, that's what I tell people, like, just, you know, to tell your story. And for us to be there and having lived it and having wrote our story and, you know, kind of just said, here's what happened. I feel like that gives them a lot of confidence.
Well,
you know?
Listen, I mean, I think what every single most rudimentary writing instruction tells you is show, don't tell, show, don't tell.
That's right.
And so literally that is, I mean, to have you come, not only for them to read your book, but to have you also come and talk to them, to have that good fortune. Like any group of students would be fortunate to have access to the writer to further explore, you know, the writer's intentions and how they did it and how they pulled it off and everything. But like that, you know, when you come up in there, you are showing them. Like, I'm not just telling them, like, you can write amazing stuff. I'm showing them. You're showing them.
Yeah. That's we personify that. And so tell me a little bit about tell me about the writing poem. Like, just what like I'm curious how you, like, talk about the books. Like, for example, how do you choose a curriculum? How do you approach how you're gonna teach these guys, that kind of stuff?
In this case, I mean, it just is that, it's that idea on steroids. I mean, what we are reading and writing. You know, I always, whenever I talk to anybody who's interested in writing, but especially people who are incarcerated who are writing, I say you can't really be a writer if you're not a reader, because our facility with language and just our recognition of all the many different ways that you can use language just grows and grows and grows the more you see how other people are doing it. What tricks are they doing? What skills do they have? So we're overwhelmingly going to read the writing of other people who have been incarcerated, who have worked in prisons, or people whose lives have been really directly impacted by the correctional system specifically, or the criminal justice system more broadly. And so we'll read the writing of, people whose family members who have been incarcerated, and a woman who was born in a prison nursery.
What an amazing story that's going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I just think it's so important to stay grounded in the success of all of those writers, and they're very, very different, and all those stories are really, really different. By men, by women.
And graphic novels in there too.
Yeah, a couple graphic novels.
Which is cool to let them know that your story can be all these different things. It could be, illustrated, it could be text, it could be a play, it could be a movie, it could be a documentary. Like, there's all these ways in which story could be a bunch of different things. It's not just, let me just tell you my memoir. Like,
Absolutely,
that's a great thing.
Right. I know, the guys definitely were a bit concerned about questions like form, and there's definitely some guys who are interested in poetry or doing a lot of poetry already. And, I can't really teach somebody fiction, and I can't really teach someone so much about, the mechanics and skills of poetry. But I don't think it's important to constrain them in terms of form. I think they need to write in the form which seems to come most naturally for them. I mean, that doesn't mean they don't need to stretch themselves, and that some of the writing assignments aren't intended to stretch you.
That's right.
But yeah, I think that nobody should be too hung up on form. They shouldn't be hung up on story. Because to me, what I think about my own book is that I really had a clear bead on the story that I wanted to tell. I think sometimes people...
Once you knew what you wanted to write, once you knew I'm going to write it, you knew what you wanted to say.
And I knew the framework of what I wanted to write. I knew that I wanted to write narrowly about the experience of incarceration and not about my entire life. Mm-hmm. I knew that I thought the time was a lot more interesting than the crime, for example. So I had a clear sense of what story I wanted to tell, and I think that's important because I think a lot of people who sit down to write personal narratives or memoirs, they know they've had an interesting life, they know they've had unusual or exciting or just crazy experiences, but what the beginning, middle, and end of the story is sort of something they struggle with sometimes. So when you are able to hone in on that question of what's the inherent narrative arc that I'm doing here, the writing becomes much easier.
One of the things I love telling them, and guys always get this, and I say, listen, we all can write a story. We all have interesting stories. We have at least one great story, which is the cops chase us, and and they all gotta get a chuckle out of that. But it's true. When you start looking at your life, okay, we have all these things which we have a shame for, but we got actually really great action stories and cinematic stories. Guys jumping over fences, throwing guns over here, shooting at the cop, whatever, right? Getaways. There's all that involved in a lot of these stories. But what I really enjoyed telling them and bringing up today. Which speaks to what you're saying about you knew what your story was. At the beginning, I didn't know for sure what I was going to tell because I thought I have so many full-length stories that don't include other parts of my story. So I could just write a book. I could have written a book of my prison years. Mm-hmm. Yep. 9 years in prison, just prison stories. Never talked on religion growing up. Never talked about my sexual awakening growing up. Never talked about, did I say education already? No, education. I didn't, and all of these are components of my story. I could have written a book about my education alone. How the education of Joe Loya, and never talked about prison, never talked about crimes, never talked about religion. There's all these ways in which I could have parsed out things and written several books without large chunks of the narrative in it. And I chose to weave it all together, which made it a big challenge. But it was nice to look at their faces when they started realizing, oh, we are all these people and all these narrative strands that don't necessarily always mingle together. We're making choices to mingle them together. And that idea that, okay, well, if you can start looking at your life like these stories that you can play with, that means there's a way to use that idea to animate yourself to change your life because you're not a static story. You can choose what to highlight and downplay.
Nor are you limited to the story that... to the stories that other people select among your many stories to emphasize. So, whether it's your family or whether it's law enforcement or, any other external person or force that may focus on one aspect of your life, it's a mistake to allow yourself to be limited by the perception of others.
I actually feel like a lot of us are in there precisely for that reason. We let the early years, when we started getting desperate and confused about our lives, and nobody was there to help us
And you're
figure it
probably
out.
also hearing really bad stories about
Exactly.
you.
People were starting to say, well, that's you're evil,
bad.
or you're a sinner, yeah, all that stuff, right? So we start believing that stuff. And it makes sense because look at my daughter. She was 2 years old in preschool, and I would go to pick her up, and she'd say, oh my God, look at this drawing she does. And I would say, oh yeah, right now she's really loves the color yellow, and she loves to do rainbows. And there's my daughter looking up at me, and then the teacher would say, oh yeah, she's getting along in school with everyone. She's a great storyteller. Aren't you a great storyteller, Matilde? And she would nod her head. And that's how it happens. At little kid, what you know about yourself is what everyone around you is telling you about yourself. That's what you know. And that is how you begin to appropriate identity, based on what people are telling you about yourself. If you're a good kid and you have love, or if you have loving parents, mindful parents, they're going to be giving you a bunch of good feedback about, oh, look at you go, you're curious. Oh, look at you go, you're brave, whatever. If you're a kid who gets in trouble, someone's dying, no parents are telling you, helping you process all that, and you start acting out, then it's going to be all these bad labels, and you believe that narrative about yourself, you're going to act it out. And then when you go to prison, like all these guys here, somebody has already written their biography. The biography is their sentencing report, where the state got their story and said, here's what you were. When you were 12, you got arrested for this. When you were this, you were kicked out of foster home. When you were that, you ran away. When this, and everything in that biography is all the shitty stuff you did. Somebody already owns their story, and the state owns it, and it's all negative.
Right. And the fact that the idea that your jacket is your biography is not true, and even more so, it's not your autobiography.
It's not your autobiography. That's right.
It's the opposite of your autobiography.
And that's what this is doing. That's what you're giving them, the chance to that somebody owns your biography already. It's your jacket. Now take it back. Do your autobiography.
I mean, I think that a lot of people experience what you've described of beginning to have labeling and constraining stories put on them that emphasize sometimes the worst of their biggest mistakes and their continuing mistakes, and those stories often hamper a person's ability to grow. I think that even people who don't come up in a situation which is harsh or full of lack may still have stories imposed on you, though.
That's true.
So I think about some of my own life. I lived in a very safe and stable home. I had very gentle parents, but definitely I was a good girl.
They gave you that. You were the good girl.
Right. And so people want to expand outside of those stories, those
This is very
tropes.
smart.
And everyone who's got siblings, or many people who have siblings say, oh, well, the oldest one is the responsible one, and the young one is the smart one, and the middle one is the fill in the blank. And so there are ways that all of us have, some kind of a story put on us, and the idea that you can harness.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's brilliant, because ultimately it's what we're talking about here, which is it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if it's you're held in too high esteem, and like people are trying to say, oh, you're up there, you're up here, you're up here, and you feel yourself more complicated, and you see yourself more textured and more flawed, and you live with yourself in ways that praise can actually harass you as much as the insults coming from the bottom in a way that
I don't know if it's much, but
I guess what I mean is harass your interior compass. You don't feel that it actually accurately reflect you, or you feel the need to want to to live up to that. So the people who are hearing all this bad stuff about them, they're like, well, that must be who I am, and they go in that direction, they stumble in that direction, and it's not who they are, but they act it out, and then eventually try to resist against it. And
part of your identity in that setting can harden and calcify to the point where you're like, I can't do good stuff anymore. All I can do is this bad
That's right.
shit.
Evil.
Right. I think we all feel constrained when we don't have a recognition of our multifaceted qualities. And that's tricky because, of course, it's a complicated, noisy world, and so there's this urgency on the part of many of us to try and simplify things and to understand things in really simple terms. And that includes the way that we regard other people. We try to, simplify who they are and understand them in the simplest terms, and sometimes that can really reduce people's humanity to a huge extent.
It's tricky. I love talking about this because one of the things I think about all the time is, what I just told you. I've been aware very early that I'm helping shape my daughter's identity. And the one thing I don't want to do, and I know it gets thrown, I have a lot of female friends, one of the complaints they have is when they were young, everyone's like, you're a nice girl, be a nice girl, behave like nice, be a good girl.
Girls hear that.
The girls hear that. So it's been an intentionality on my part to not say, be nice, don't be mean, like, you're a nice girl. Like, nice, to me, if I say that word, it's our family's N word. It's like the word that I don't want to use because it's like I've heard all my friends that is a horrible word that they carry like a burden because they want to do things outside of what has been. It's a very confining word. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes I will try to give her language about who she is that is as close to the behavior I'm watching. Mm-hmm. It's not aspirational. Mm-hmm. It's not like, oh man, my daughter's behaving really badly. I want to give her this thing to make her believe that she's actually really nice. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say, we're some other positive thing. Oh man, you know what? That thing you did yesterday was brave. And I do brave, I do strong. I always talk about how funny she is and smart. Mm-hmm. But there's also other thing where I give her and I tell her, if you ever did something bad that offended people and it had a quality to it that people got very upset, I tell her, if the whole neighborhood came to the front yard because of something you had done, I would stand on that porch and I would say, get the hell out of my yard. That's my daughter. I create the occasion for her to imagine that there is room in my imagination that she might one day be textured enough to violate some rules.
Good.
Just, if nothing else, to let her know.
Because she will.
And I want her to know that I don't think you're going to be perfect. Frankly, I don't know anybody who is. I certainly don't expect myself to be perfect. Why would I want to impose that on her? Mm-hmm. It's more important to let her know that one of the things you get from having a dad who was a complete fuck up once upon a time is I know you're gonna fuck up, and so I extend to you, beforehand the compassion and sensitivity, mm-hmm. and I'll get your back, mm-hmm. Yeah, it is really, it's something I think about a lot, labels, the labels that we put on people. And that's the lovely thing about this writing. Guys get to appropriate new language about themselves. Mm-hmm. They're sitting there doing what we did. They are writing on the page with all that clamor around them. But the intercom, did you keep hearing that intercom interrupt us? Mm-hmm. I was like, fuck, man, that's exactly how it was. Trying to get in a zone and write something with noise and keys clanging and people hollering down. They're doing what we were doing.
Yeah. Not a lot of peace there, but it was really interesting to sort of walk down the hall there with you and to sort of walk, nobody's ever like relaxed in a prison, including you or I when we visit it or a place like that. But still, today to sort of be walking down the hall with my friend in this setting that we'd both chosen to be in was just so different and such a big, sort of things come full circle.
I'm telling you, it was so strange. It was a wonderful place to be. Okay, so I gotta tell you, heist films, I'm talking to my friends about heist films. That's one that ostensibly these interviews or conversations are about. So I have not seen Set It Off. And I'm gonna just tell you, let me say it. I'm in front of God and everyone, all my friends who are listening. I'm embarrassed to say I've not seen Set It Off. I'm embarrassed. I'm raising my hand to God, man. I'm totally embarrassed. And so I want you to tell me what I'm going to expect, like why you like it. The reason I tell you this is because a friend scolded me the other day so righteously for not seeing this movie, and I really feel like I should have seen it. So tell me, I'm going to go watch it, but tell me, what is it about you? You like when I ask you, what's your favorite, you're like, Set It Off, obviously, Set It Off.
Oh, yeah.
Why obviously Set It Off? And let me hear your feedback on that.
Well, Set It Off came out, I may get the year wrong, but it came out in the 90s, let's say 96 or 97, I think. Set It Off is a classic bank robbery story, which is one of the reasons it's shocking you have not seen
I know. Okay, all right.
And so Set It Off follows, a girl gang, basically. Yeah. Jada Pinkett.
Right.
And Queen Latifah.
Right.
Vivica Fox, mm-hmm. and Kimberly Elise are longtime friends in Los Angeles, or somewhere down in Southern California. And I wouldn't say they're all good girls, but some of them are definitely good girls, quote unquote good girls. They have that on them. They have that imposed on them. They are struggling. They're living, in working class families and trying to take care of little siblings and all kinds of things, but they're all trying to do right, more or less. Queen Latifah's character is called Cleo, and she is a butch lesbian. And so right from the beginning of the film, she is the one who is most clearly living outside of the mainstream in all her choices. Because again, remember, this is the late 90s. This is not 2014 when we have marriage equality and all that stuff. That character of Cleo was just so revolutionary to me. So I'm not going to go into all the spoilers, but as it comes to pass, these ladies start robbing banks. And I love the film on many, many levels. It's an incredibly entertaining piece of pop culture, first of all. The film is done in a way that is just really relentless and exciting, and it's just a great movie in and of itself. But it's also about women transgressing their gender roles, picking up a gun, robbing a bank, for a variety of reasons. All of the characters have their own distinct intentions and things that make them cross the line.
Right.
And much more than most crime films, I feel like the film really does show what makes it possible for each of those women to sort of cross the line. Yeah, Cleo maybe has crossed the line the most already, but the other three women have a lot of distance to cover before they're willing to pick up a gun and walk into a bank, but they all do. And I think what's beautiful about the film is that it does show that backstory in a way that very few films do when they're talking about crime.
Right.
So often when you show crime on TV, on a film, the excitement of doing something transgressive is more than enough for the to fill in all the drama of the film. So the director really took the time to sort of go to those backstories, and they don't drag; they're interesting. So these are women who are transgressing gender roles, and also they're African American women. So that makes it an even more unusual story, because it's just so rare to see a film which shows powerful female agency, which puts African American women in that central protagonist role. And in this case, there's 4 of them. And part of the beauty of the film is also the exploration of their friendship, because they have the 4 of them have this long-standing friendship, but of course there's conflict within the friendship, and especially as their crime spree continues. That sort of opens up. So those are some of the reasons I love that film. I do especially, though, love it for that character of Cleo, played by Queen Latifah.
Where were you? What was going on in your life at that time when you were watching, when it first came out? Did you see it in the theaters?
I went and saw it in the theaters. Definitely. I think Larry came with me to see it. I think it was, I think the Larry years had begun whenever the film was, that's why I think it was 96, 97. And he and I just recently went and saw it again in the theater, and it totally holds up. I mean, it's great. It's a great, great movie. I was in, that was a moment in time when, I had left my own, brief exploration of crime, but I had not yet been held accountable for my crime.
Right.
So I had not yet been indicted. So that's that moment in time when that film was released and I first saw it.
Wow.
I love that movie.
Hold on. God damn, that sounds exciting. It's interesting. I write crime stuff. I write crime movies. I've written a couple heist movies. And to follow 4 friendships is a challenge. And one of the things my friend mentioned to me, and you kind of touched on it here, is one of the things that makes it such an interesting heist film is to see the 4 friends play off of it, that relationship, and through the heist film. That's what makes Dog Day Afternoon such a great movie, because there's all these connections, and they start bringing all these people. You start seeing the relationships, and it almost is the bank robbery ends up being incidental. It's just a location at that point, or a crime scene.
I love Dog Day Afternoon.
Dog Day Afternoon for the same reason, right? It's all these relationships. Chris Sarandon in that was so amazing as the wife and stuff, right? So, but yeah, I think that's one of the reasons I need to see it, because I need to have that in my film lexicon. I need to know more about. And I feel horrible. I mean, it's only recently I've known that I felt like I should watch it, but it is that gap. And so you're looking at me, and I feel like, oh man, Piper, I'm sorry to disappoint you.
How do you feel about Bonnie and Clyde? I watched Bonnie and Clyde again recently, and was really struck by, again, how much that film holds up too.
Some of these films hold up for various reasons. Well, that one holds up because it's a very stylish movie. Mm-hmm. All right, and like we know, a lot of the reasons why bank robbery movies hold up is because it's beautiful people. Bank robbery. And, people have heard me say this, all the Hollywood hunks have played a bank robber, from Clark Gable, Warren Beatty, Paul Newman, Robert Redford, De Niro and Pacino, and then Clooney and Pitt. And it's like that's one of the reasons it's so beautiful. It holds up. They're beautiful people. It's glamorous. I mean, Johnny Depp, I love, I tell people this, but Public Enemies, when Johnny Depp put his hand on the counter, he jumped over the counter playing John Dillinger, and his coat, his trench coat flies open. I looked at that for a brief moment. I was like, God damn, that is so beautiful. Mm-hmm. To have all that money, to have the women. And I was like, wait a minute, I even had a trench coat. Like, I forgot for a minute that was me. It was so beautiful to watch. I got lost in the style. I got lost in that. That's why some of the reasons they hold up. Mm-hmm. They are definitely a part of the romanticization of our culture. Like, we have it in ways that other cultures don't have it. Mm-hmm. So we're watching Bonnie and Clyde, and we can't watch Bonnie and Clyde without knowing about the Depression era bank robbers and like all these people who are folk heroes and Jesse J. There's that romanticization that happens in our culture. But it was a well-made movie. It's a beautiful movie. It's a surprising movie. What would be nice is for there to be a remake of it. Because
I always worry about the remakes.
Well, let me tell you. Some remakes are bad, but what's interesting that doesn't really get dealt with is that these feel like you're trying to follow these people, but what I know now about bank robbers is it's a lot more grubby, and it didn't feel grubby. It looked too pretty. Mm-hmm. It's a grubby thing, and the choices you make, like this, the pressures on my poise to make me go rob a bank were nowhere as sexy as the bank robberies that I pulled off. Like, there's really some hard stuff there. To be as mean, to be as angry, to be as full of rage, to terrorize people and move them around like chess pieces on the board, there's an ugliness that has to underwrite that. Mm-hmm. And I don't feel that those characters were ugly enough. No, that's what I mean. You know what I mean? That's what I'm talking about.
Is it Out of Sight?
Yeah.
Yeah, which I really like that movie. I don't know how you feel about it. What I like about it is that he kind of screws up, right? I mean, you see a bank robber who's not like the sort of super polished, like, getting away with it guy. He's, getting nailed.
he gets nailed right away in a fucked up car. Mm-hmm. That's bank robbery. I saw that, and I remember, getting an exploding dye pack in my hand. And it falling out of my bag, my bag exploding. I was 20 feet from the bag, which isn't as bad as the guy who put the money down the front of his pants and blew off his left nut. And so we will end it on the left nut being blown out. That's a good place to end it. Listen, it was great to hang out with you today. Really, at this writing for your writing class, that was fantastic.
Thank you for coming.
I look forward to coming back.
Oh, it's always fun to hang out with you, Joe.
And thanks for being on the podcast.
Of course.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
The Allure of Crime is hosted by Joe Loya. Produced by Joe Loya, Roberto Miguel, and Dorian Cohen, with production coordinator Roberto Miguel, director of photography Dorian Cohen, director of music Roberto Miguel, audio engineer Kyan Taylor, score and theme song by Roberto Miguel and Kyan Taylor, artwork by Gats, and I'm your social media coordinator, Pilar Reyes.